2024 году, если вы просто постараетесь посмотреть на одну цифру или на несколько общих показателей, на которых мы смотрим, ВВП на душу населения, зарплаты, все выглядит хорошо. Один из лучших годов в последней недавней истории. Но, конечно, мы знаем, что дьявол в деталях, поэтому белорусская экономика, особенно учитывая то, что есть ограничения на доступ к информации, здесь есть много нюансов. Важно смотреть не только на один-два макроэкономических показателя, но посмотреть внутрь, для того, чтобы понять, как себя чувствуют компании, люди, что стоит за макроэкономическими тенденциями и насколько они устойчивы, для того, чтобы понять, куда мы движемся. Сегодня у нас будет 4 презентации, которыми мы постараемся охватить белорусскую экономику под разными углами зрения. Мы рассмотрим макроэкономику, микроэкономику, рассмотрим то, что думает домашнее хозяйство, посмотрим на то, что думает бизнес, особенно бизнес в диаспоре. Без дальнейших промедлений, я думаю, мы можем начать. Да. Я передаю слово своему коллеге Дмитрию Круку. Дмитрий, приветствую вас. Добрый день всем. Федор. Жду включения презентации. Итак, наверное, пару вступительных слов. Я с Анатолием представим вам, соответственно, то, что было в 2024 году, и Анатолий представит то, что мы ожидаем в 2025 году. Мы оба будем говорить про макроэкономику, и это обычный комментарий с моей стороны. Некоторые цифры, некоторые диагнозы могут отличаться от того, что вы увидите во второй части, потому что вторая часть посвящена более глубокому взгляду на то, что происходит с домашними хозяйствами и бизнесами, учитывая ограниченность предоставленной статистики. Давайте начнем с макроэкономических тенденций в 2024 году. И, как обычно, да, теперь видно. Я начну с большой картины, и после этого мы рассмотрим каждый из этих пунктов более подробно. Но я думаю, что получить общую картину крайне важно. Во-первых, давайте систематизируем некоторые основные факты 2024 года. Первая часть года, первая половина характеризовалась резким ускорением выпуска, и это противоречило тем ожиданиям, которые разделялись некоторыми экспертами, но вместе с тем, опять-таки, было ускорение. Во втором полугодии, наоборот, опять-таки, противоречие с имеющимися ожиданиями, произошло серьезное замедление.
Quarter, there are certainly no statistics, but some preliminary estimates based on October and recent data from November even give some signs that in the fourth quarter of 2024, perhaps we will have a downturn. So the next very important fact that the growth was mainly driven by domestic demand. It is somehow different from the previous year, and just domestic demand was purely responsible for all positive contribution to growth, and in turn, in the composition, in the structure of domestic demand, the main component was household consumption. And if we dig even deeper, the main underlying factor here was labor shortage. So the logic here was as follows. The shortage of labor, it was one of the factors behind the very rapid growth of wages. In turn, the growth of wages, it facilitated consumer sentiment and secured additional disposable income by households, which transformed into growing household consumption. As for capital investments, the picture was different. On the one hand, the government tried to stimulate and facilitate the growth of capital investments. On the other hand, there were still plenty of obstacles and risks from the side of firms, which restricted the growth of capital investments, and that is why there were rather turbulence throughout the year. Foreign trade. The whole mechanics of recent growth in Belarus, it is growing demand for exports is the crucial ingredient for supporting this model. And in the first half of 2024, it is still was growing, but in the second half, as we will see a bit later, the situation changed, and actually this is also an extremely important factor behind the deteriorating performance of the economy in the second half. And some more important insights, some sectoral effects took place and also were positive for the perspective of the economy, and mainly they stemmed from ICT, construction and manufacturing industry. Artificially restrained inflation, this is background factor that we still deal in the Belarusian economy, and still it is pretty important as a hidden factor behind the growth of consumer demand. And one more, and the last but not least update, there were still plenty of monetary and fiscal stimulus in the economy, but as for monetary stimulus, they were mainly weakening, although the inertia was huge. So this is the big picture. Sorry, it does not work perfectly. Yeah, and brief summarization, and then we will go highlight to highlight. So how to understand, I think it is important to have a kind of mind map in the head, and it will be much simpler to interpret what we had in 2024. So this is a kind of two competing forces in the economy. Some forces are still pushing economy to grow, but there are plenty of opposite forces that restrict this growth. I will not go again one by one. Actually, I went through them at the previous slide when we were talking about the facts, but here they are divided from the perspective of which kind of effect they produce for the perspective of output growth. And as a result of this picture in 2024, let's quickly look what it will mean and what does it mean from the perspective of growth level and from the perspective of international comparison. So from the perspective of growth level, we may say, and it is important, that Belarusian economy has reached a new peak. So actually the recovery regime that was peculiar to the economy in 2023 and early 2024 has already been passed, and we are functioning in a new range outside the recovery range, but this one more reason for explaining why we have problems with further growth, as securing growth in this range is harder than in the recovery period. Also, an important insight, I think, if we compare with so-called counterfactual scenario, if we still try to remember about what we had in other life before the war, and still try to compare our actual path of our output with counterfactual. Counterfactual, this is the focus prevailing before the beginning of war, and it actually rather very simply the projection of dominating before war growth rate, long-term growth rate for the Belarusian economy of 1.5 per year. So if we compare the actual path with those paths, we still can argue there are some losses. These losses are being compensated, but still we are behind the path that we were expecting before the war, if the life were different. And the last representation of the year 24 from the results that we have already obtained, international perspective. For me, this is one of my favorite representations. I think it is extremely important to understand where are we in comparison to our neighbors. So what you can see here, this is the share of GDP per capita in Belarus in purchasing power parity approach, so measured in international dollars of 2021. In comparison to CEP, CEP is this acronym for Central Europe and Baltic. So here the average of 11 countries in our region. So we can say that today the well-being and once again, this is the indicator of GDP per capita in PPP. In Belarus is about 66% of the average among these 11 countries in our region. So last 2 years and some growth in this year allowed to compensate losses of previous year, but still at the long-term horizon, we are pretty behind those peaks we had 10 years ago. Now let's go from this big picture, let's go to more details and more visualizations with figures of those highlights I have already presented. So once again, 2 halves of the year are very different. In the first half of the year, we were arguing about acceleration of growth, and it really was surprising. And in the second half, the picture is different. So as I mentioned, for sure, we had a pretty sensitive slowdown in the third quarter, and based on current assumptions, once again, we're still in the second quarter. Of course, we don't have the data on the second quarter. These are estimations. But most probably, relying on the data recently published for November, in the first quarter, we will have a slight downturn in the economy. So the economy is weakening at least, and even there are some risk of going into downturn. But still, taking into account the whole year, we will have a pretty, maybe I'll start with this arithmetics algebra of growth. We will still have a growth of 3.8 percentage points. And this algebra, it decomposes the contribution of the demand components to this growth. So what we can see here, household consumption, household final consumption was actually the major and most important driving force behind growth. Although exports, as I mentioned, exports itself also secured some positive growth. By default, it should secure positive growth. But in combination with imports, in total, net export produced some negative contribution to growth. So the previous graph, I'll go to it once again. It shows how it looks like in dynamics. So the red line, this is our domestic demand, household consumption plus capital investment plus some other minor components. And the yellow line, this is net exports, so or we can call it also more informally net foreign demand. And the blue line is GDP, so which is actually which consists of both of them. But more or less secure path, more or less secure regime of economic growth if we have more or less synchronized growth in both net exports and domestic demand, or at least net exports is not deteriorating steadily. Otherwise, we can argue that there are some distortions in the economy, and this is a risk of instability, nominal instability, and potential financial turbulence. And actually, this deterioration, it is not yet a very sharp deterioration of net export, but nevertheless, this picture, it visualizes the risks that we have today on the agenda from the perspective of overheated economy on the one hand, and the lack of nominal stability in external position on the other hand. No, not that. Why, once again, why domestic household consumption was growing so rapidly? Once again, I have already mentioned it. It is very important. This is because of unbelievable growth of real wages. The red line, this is overall real wages. And if we compare today's level of real wages with the pre-war level, today we have 23 some 0.8, as I remember, almost 25% in real terms. Real wages, average real wages, are higher than just before the beginning of war, and actually it fuels household consumption and creates those positive consumer sentiment that we see in our economy. And here we can see that is why household consumption is definitely outpacing this one. This line is definitely outpacing the whole economy and the output. At the same time, another important component of domestic demand, gross fixed capital formation, after rather rapid recovery in 2023, in 2024, displayed a much lower and much more modest growth. And it is pretty important fact from two perspectives. The first one, taking in mind that currently the deficit, the shortage of production capacities in the economy, the idea of the current authorities is to stimulate investment demand just in order to overcome this challenge of the lack of production capacities. And another perspective from which it is important, Anatoly will talk about this, I think, in the context of the next year more, but the government also see and consider capital investment as a more favorable, more attractive driving force in the domestic demand for stimulating the economy. So here we can argue once again that despite a pretty strong desire of government to push capital investments, their growth is not that huge, despite plenty of stimulus provided for their growth, including not only monetary and fiscal stimulus, but also, as I call them, administrative stimuli, so-called pressure on state-owned enterprises with plans regarding their investment activity. If we go to foreign trade dimension, after what we had at domestic demand, in the foreign trade dimension, we can see the signs of in the very end of the year, the signs of deterioration of the situation. It is not yet that sharp. So you can see it here if you take moving averages. So during the almost all the year long, it was not that huge deterioration. It was even, we may say, it was somehow stable, although some signs of deterioration. But in recent months, there are some rather significant deterioration. And if we try to recalculate this in terms of physical volumes, which is much more important from the perspective of output and GDP, we can see a rather significant decrease of both exports and imports in physical terms in the third quarter of this year. And from a longer perspective, I would emphasize the peculiarity of turbulence, of instability of both exports and imports. But from shorter perspective, I think it is this trend, this event of significant decrease is very important. And this is one more cornerstone, perhaps the most important cornerstone behind the deterioration of output growth in the economy. This is a big secret, and we have just nominal figures regarding the external trade, and this data we have it only for the first part of the year, but it shows that in the first part of the year, when we know that the situation with trade was more or less attractive and favorable, it was mainly due to increase of this blue area. This is exports to other countries, mainly consisting of potash fertilizers and oil products. So, and due to this, there was not so strong, but nevertheless, a trend of decreasing of the share of exports to Russia. This is a red line. So it is much higher, of course, than it was before the war, but some gradual decrease what took place in the beginning of the year. So most probably, and based on the data we have currently, we can argue that there were shocks in both in exports to other countries, and from other data, from other facts, we can have at least some witnesses that there were at least short-term problems with exports of potash fertilizers and oil products, and together with some signs of slowing demand in Russia, this might explain the situation with exports we had in the second part of the year. So at the same time, also an important background factor, what we had in terms of price competitiveness of Belarusian producers. This was pretty stable. There were some minor improvement of price competitiveness. So this might not be a good explanation why we had problems in external trade in the second part of the year. Even more than this, this slide increase once again, it even provided some support to foreign trade. So the diagnosis here, I would repeat it once again, most probably this is a kind of natural, a kind of exogenous shock just to physical volumes, to demand to potash fertilizers, to oil products, and some decrease of exports from Russia. I'll skip this maybe, yeah. A couple of words about industrial effects I mentioned. An important trend that we had in 2024, this is, we can not obviously call it positive industrial effect. Maybe more correctly, it would be to call it the end of negative industrial effect, because due to huge outflow of labor in ICT industry in 2 previous years, the industry has lost a significant part of its value added and its possibility to produce. But actually in 2024, we may argue the situation has stabilized, and this green line, as you see, this is ICT industry. It displayed some growth, not that huge, but at least this negative in sectoral effect that we had in 2022 and 2023, at least it is over. And at the background of huge consumer sentiment, we can not obviously assign all this effect to just industrial supply side positive some gains and some positive effects, but nevertheless this adjustment to new environment, it resulted in some positive signs of supply in trade. So let me sum up the picture, and now from ingredients I will finish with a big picture. So on the one hand, as I mentioned, we have a couple of driving forces. There are still some driving forces that push growth, and still some driving forces that restrict this growth. And let me finish before Anatoly will talk about 25, more on the forces that restrict growth, because by the end of the year, just these forces turned out to be more and more powerful. So what are these forces? Deteriorating financial position of firms. This I think this is one of the most risky factor for the current economy, because both due to price regulation and due to excessive growth of labor, the firms are pushed to worse and worse financial position. And based on some inside research from different industry, we may argue that at least in some industries, the situation is pretty risky and can produce cause financial turbulence. The second, more or less traditional problem, this is, as I showed you, deteriorating external position. It is not yet at somehow critical levels, but taking in mind that we don't have enough sources and evidence sources for financial potential deficit, it is pretty risky, and it might restrain growth more and more. And the third macroeconomic distortion on the agenda, suppressed inflation and inflationary pressure, which can result, especially taking in mind Russia's divergence in inflation with Russia, which can result in inflationary spikes. But some more risks, let me skip this. I want to finish this. In addition to those major distortions, by the end of the year, we can also argue that some more factors are on the agenda that can negatively contribute to the perspectives and prospects of the Belarusian economy in 2025. And among recently visualized new factors, I shall list restrictive policies in Russia, and actually their monetary policy has become extremely restrictive, and most probably in early 2025 we will see the results of this tight monetary policy. More and more concerns at the end of the year regarding not so much global growth, but regarding the global prices in 2025. And as I showed, it is extremely sensitive and crucial for the Belarusian economy what will happen with prices for oil and potash fertilizers. I think oil is more in focus here, but it should be taken in mind. And somehow traditional, but always unexpected and new, the factor of potentially new sanctions pressure episodes stemming either from new regimes of implementations of fault packages, or maybe some accumulated effects because of sanctions that were introduced recently. So how, having all this in mind, we can develop in 2025. This is, as usual, a huge uncertainty, and Anatoly is the guy who will try to make this uncertainty narrower and produce you our vision of what we can expect at 2025.
Yes, thank you, Dmitry. Yeah, I also should remind that just our schedule, that now we'll have presentation of Anatoly, then we'll have at 3 o'clock short coffee break, and then another 2 presentations, and questions we plan to have at the end. So remember your questions. Yeah, as Dmitry said, 2024 can be pretty much split into 2 equal halves, one rapid growth, and from the May kind of full stagnation. And now Anatoly will try to tell us and scientifically guess which part 2025 will look like, which part of 2024.
Yeah, thank you, Lev. So I will present macroeconomic forecast for Belarus for the next year and try to outline the key risks to this forecast. So first of all, I should know that I will present only the baseline scenario it means that scenario whose assumptions are assessed as the most realistic in current conditions. The forecast is based on a quarterly projection model. This is a semi-structural macroeconomic gap model, which developed by BEROC experts and tailored to the Belarusian economic characteristics. So such type of models has been widely used for macroeconomic analysis and forecasting in central banks and international financial organization. So to briefly summarize, in the baseline scenario, it is expected a slowdown in GDP growth of Belarus to about 1.7%, and this slowdown will be driven by supply-side production constraints. In turn, domestic economic policy will remain moderately loose, which together with the government efforts to boost public investments, including through the directed lending, will sustain high domestic demand. So the Belarusian economy will continue to operate in a state of excess demand, which will exert high inflationary pressure. So if price controls remain but will gradually loosen, then inflation will increase from about 5.4% this year to 7.6% next year. So the Belarusian ruble in the baseline scenario is forecast to moderately weaken by 4-6% next year, while interest rates on ruble loans and deposits will be maintained close to their neutral levels. The baseline scenario does not assume collapse of Russian or world economies. However, the uncertainty remains extremely high. So I will start with 2024, but from a bit different perspective. So in the current year, the Belarusian economy will grow by approximately 3.8, 3.9%. And you can see on this chart that the volume of output, the level of economic activity is still close to its historical peak. Partially, this high growth this year is attributed to the potential output dynamic. So about 1.8 percentage points of this growth can be considered sustainable. However, the bigger part of this growth is because of excess domestic and foreign demand. And you can see that the volume of output in real terms in Q4 24 is assessed at about 2.2% above the balanced or potential level. So it means that the Belarusian economy is overheated now. The scale of this overheating is moderate, yet not immediately critical for macroeconomic destabilization. For example, in 2012, 2014, the Belarusian economy continuously functioned in a state of overheating, with the output gap never falling below 2.8% and averaging more than 5% during that period. However, overheating makes the economy highly vulnerable to strong shocks. And for example, in the late 2014, the Belarusian economy met such a shock, recession in Russia. So which factors has driven this overheating? So both domestic and external. The key domestic factors are prolonged loose monetary conditions, a significant rise in budget expenditures, and very high real wages growth amid labor shortages. You can see on the left chart that the importance of these factors changed over time, and in the current year, the monetary stimulus has been largely replaced by fiscal expansion and rising wages. Despite high volume of output, high economic activity, you can see from the right chart that its growth has weakened significantly in the second half of this year. And this weakening is mostly because of the influence of supply-side production constraints. So shortage of workers, record-breaking capacity utilization in industry. So difficulties with logistics because of sanctions, and increased competition in the Russian market constrained the ability of Belarusian producers to maintain high growth rates of output. And in the baseline scenario, it is assumed that these supply-side limiters will negatively affect the GDP growth next year, and coupled with expected slowdown in the Russian economy, this will lead to the deceleration of GDP growth to approximately 1.7% next year in the baseline scenario. However, despite this slowdown, the volume of output, the level of economic activity will still be high, and in real terms, the output will be above its potential or sustainable level. So the output gap is expected to be positive. Expected stimulative fiscal policy, non-restrictive monetary conditions, and as I said before, government efforts to boost public investment will sustain this high domestic demand, and the economy will continue to operate in a state of excess demand. The labor market will continue to function in conditions of labor shortages, which will push wages upwards. Expected increase in government spending will also contribute to household income growth. However, the abilities of firms to increase wages will be limited because of expected slower output growth, both in Belarus and Russia, the consequences of price controls, and rising borrowing costs. So in the baseline scenario, real wage growth is forecast to be 5% next year, after an increase by about 13% this year. And these dynamics will correspond to gradual decrease of the extent to which real wages exceed their balanced level. So in an environment of excess demand, imports will remain elevated next year, while export dynamics will weaken under the influence of both demand and supply side factors. From the demand perspective, export growth will be constrained by expected decrease growth in Russia, and from the supply side, the negative effects on export is expected from the lack of production capacity and labor force, and infrastructure barriers also. So this imports and exports dynamics will result in deficit of foreign trade in goods and services, which is forecast close to 0.1% of GDP next year. And such a scale of the deficit creates condition not for devaluation, but for moderate depreciation of the Belarusian ruble next year. So in the baseline scenario, the Belarusian ruble will weaken by approximately 4.6% next year in terms of a currency basket. So overheated consumer demand, increased labor. Implementation of this scenario depends critically on the assumptions. So in the baseline scenario, it is assumed that the sanctions regime will remain in place in the medium term, that import and export logistic chains will not be disrupted, or the adaptability of business, households, authorities to the possible disruptions will be high. And also Russia will continue provide support, energy and financial support to Belarus. Regarding domestic economic policy prerequisites, the baseline scenario assumes that price controls will remain, but become less strict, that fiscal policy will remain stimulative, but the scale of this stimulus will decrease. So consolidated budget expenditures is expected to grow by 3-4% in real terms next year, after an increase by more than 5% this year. And also it is assumed that the ability of National Bank to independently use monetary policy tools and set quantitative values for monetary policy target will be constrained, and monetary policy will remain discretionary and will not correspond either to inflation or monetary targeting. And regarding external assumptions, the economic growth in Russia will weaken. So the Russian GDP will grow by approximately 1.5% next year, after an increase by about 3.9% this year. The external inflationary pressure will remain elevated. So inflation in Russia is expected to be close to 7% by the end of the next year, after about 9.7% this year. Yes. So, as I said before, the degree of forecast uncertainty is still extremely high, and there are both upsides and downsides risks. So the possibility of hard landing scenario is not negligible. Hard landing means a significant decline in output, in level of output, and decrease of household consumption. Something like the deep recession which Belarusian economy experienced in 2015-2016. So because of the overheating and compromise independence of the National Bank, the Belarusian economy becomes very fragile to strong shocks. So if domestic economic policy remains overly loose for a long time and demand in Russia declines sharply, then the possibility of this hard landing scenario will significantly increase. And a key threat, if such a scenario materializes, is whether firms and banks can overcome a sharp drop in demand without going into a wave of bankruptcies and a financial crisis. So risks of higher economic growth are mostly linked to the development in the Russian economy. So if Russia's GDP grows more than expected in the baseline scenario, then the Belarusian economy can also grow faster. And if such scenario materializes, the intensification of investments in capacity expansion and increased labor productivity in Belarus will become more possible, which will mean higher economic growth compared to the baseline scenario through a faster adjustment of supply to the high demand. Also, there is still high uncertainty regarding the potential growth rates of the Belarusian economy, so about the sustainable growth. It is possible that potential GDP growth, so not high investment activity, coupled with a reduction in employment and deterioration
Okay, so looks like we have fixed some technical problems, and now we are happy to see Violeta Panasevich, who would talk about how people inside of the economy feel what's going on, and how. So previously we've seen situation from the macroeconomic point of view, and now we'll see situation from the inside. Violetta, you're welcome. Yeah.
Пока даже еще не welcome. Как это работает?
Должен работать.
Okay, as usual, good afternoon. Now we're gonna fix something and it's gonna work. Today is gonna be the most positive presentation ever because we're gonna speak about consumer confidence, consumer behavior, consumer consumption, the trends that are really the main drivers for Belarusian economic growth in the last years. Yes, I will start with the base for the analysis as usual. This analysis is based on 11 online surveys. Online surveys are held in Belarus from December 2021 to November 2022. And this is urban residents aged from 18 to 64 years. And the sample corresponds to the structure of the urban population in Belarus and has been adjusted for gender, region, and age. Thank you. And let's start as usual with incomes. So as we have heard from Dmitry and Anatoly presentations, the nominal and the real annual wage in Belarus has been rising over the past years. And our survey can prove that for sure. If we see the results of the wave, for example, April 2022, the share of respondents with declining income was about half of all the respondents, was about 52%. In November 24, this share is less by 2 times. So 26% can respond that their income has declined. And on the contrary, the share of people with increasing income has also risen from 5% in the beginning of the sample to 17% in the 2024. But if we look a little bit deeper onto people with decreasing incomes, there are 2 main reasons for decreasing incomes. The first one is usual, it's classical, is inflation. The second one is forex exchange rate, so exchange rate of Belarusian ruble to other currencies. And this reason has been losing its popularity over the last year. So if we calculate the share of people with declining incomes, but not due to inflation or forex exchange rate, this amount is going to be, this share going to be only 18%. So not much at all. And if we ask people, how do you cope with this problem? How do you address the problem of declining incomes? So the main approach was to save on leisure, save on food, buy cheaper clothes, and postpone major purchases. It was common during the first 3 years of the survey. But in 2024, this ranking has changed a little bit. So now even respondents with declining income prefer to overdue payments, to go into their savings, and they're not really into buying cheaper clothes and postpone major purchases. This is kind of a small indicator of rising consumption even among people with declining incomes. But for now, let's speak about all respondents with rising income also. And we have asked them just a simple question: how do you spend and how do you save? If there is a difference in consumption behavior and in savings behavior. So the quick answer is no, there is no difference. And the majority of our respondents would like to spend more as they used to do it. So about 45% of all respondents say that they have started to spend more as they used to do it. And about 38% of all respondents spend as before. And we know that even in the situation of rising wages, of rising salaries, it did not provoke people to save more. It has provoked people to spend more. And we can see it on the graph with savings. So only about 9-8% of all respondents have started to save more, and about 25% of respondents save as before. What's more interesting is that about 38% of all respondents do not save at all, even knowing there is an increase in wages. And let's talk about index which can illustrate that trends, the dynamics in consumption behavior, in spending, in savings altogether. So this is consumer confidence indicator. This is an index, it's a composite indicator which shows us how do people assess their financial situation and how do they assess economic situation in the country. So it combines both together. And we can see that from the drop of minus 28% in the beginning of the war, Belarusian index has recovered and reached a neutral level to 0% in November 24. We show in this index in combination with Russian index because the rate of recovery of these both indexes are really the same, with only one exception that Belarusian index is has higher values, and that Russian index in the very end of the observed period has declined, while Belarusian index, on the contrary, increased. This index is based on 5 components, as I previously told: economic situation and financial situation of your household. And let's talk about every component in detail. So the first component is about economic situation that was in the previous year. And we can see here also the positive dynamics. So in the beginning of the sample, only in the beginning of the observed period, only 5% of all respondents told that they think that economic situation has improved in the past year in Belarus. For now, this is 5 times more. It's 26% of respondents who say that the economic situation has really improved. And what's more interesting is the share of people who reported a decline in economic situation, that it's worsening. So it was about 72%. For now, it's only 30% of all respondents. And I should notice that the share of people who find this question difficult to answer has a little bit risen also, from an average 9% to 15% in the last survey wave. The second component is about economic situation in the future, so expectations of respondents. And this is the most difficult question to respondents because their difficult to answer option is very popular among them. It's really difficult to respondents to think if the economic situation gonna be better or worsen. But still, 27% of respondents say that the economic situation will improve. 24% say that it's gonna stay the same. And the share of those who think that the economic situation is going to worsen has been declined as usual. The next 2 components are about financial situation in your family, so like household income. And at the first glance, we can see that people assess their economic situation much better than they do it with economic situation in the country. So, and it happens usually because of the no change answer. So the majority of respondents say that they did not identify any change in their financial situation over the past year. But still, there is a positive trend from 10% in the beginning of the sample to 23% of those who think that their financial situation has improved over the next year. And the expectations are like the best, because only like 30% of all respondents say that they expect their financial situation to improve in the future year. And this is like the highest percentage, the highest share of all components. And people still there is some share which is not sure about the future of their financial situation in the family. And the next component is about major purchases. Here is also a positive trend from 8% to 22%. And 38% think that there is like equal amounts of pluses and minuses in the economy to have major purchases. And here is just a small formula. How do we calculate all these components? But what is more important is the dynamics of these components altogether. And let's see how it was. So you can see the black line, which represents the consumer confidence index we've been talking about. It's been from minus 28% of showed you and 0% in November 2022. And the other lines are the components of this indicator. So what's interesting is that the gap between the lowest component, the most negative component, which is country past, and the most positive component, which is family future, was really big. It was like almost 45% differences between these two parameters, between these two components. But all over the years, this gap has been narrowed from at least 45% to 10-15% in November 24. So now people assess both the their financial situation and economic situation in the country at the same level. And just a small information maybe for Belarusians, about Belarusian regions, is that people with the most positive index, with the most positive assessment of this index, are living in Gomel and Mogilov region. And people who are the most negative, as usual, live in Minsk city. And let's turn to consumer confidence index. What's happening? In the EU, so under another methodology, not under Eurostat methodology, but under Eurostat methodology. This is like the same index, but it's based on 4 components. We exclude country past component, which played the most significant role, as you can see there on the graph. So we're going to speak about consumer confidence index in the Europe. And what we know that in the 4th quarter compared to the 3rd quarter, Belarusian index has a little bit risen to just 0%. And the whole EU index has declined a little bit from -11 to -12%. And we can see that it was really common for the previous 2 quarters for the most economies of Europe to decline a bit, to decline in their assessment of economic situation and financial situation in the country. And still, it's not really common for this index to enter the positive zone, but we have still identified some countries that reach it. So, for example, Lithuania is #1 in the ranking of CCI components, and Serbia and Sweden has also managed to enter and to stay in the positive zone of this index. Also, it was common for Poland, but in summer and spring. But let's see the trend about in neighboring countries of Belarus and EU as a whole. So we can see that the trend both for Lithuania and Belarus and Latvia and even Poland is a little bit the same. So it's a positive trend of recovery from a big drop which happened in Belarus in April 22, but for majority of European countries in August 22. There is still like a little bit drop for Poland for the last 2 quarters, but Lithuania is still the leader. And if it's not a competition, so we should not really compare the rankings among the countries, but just for the information that Belarus was ranked 25th in the beginning of the observation period, and now it's on the 4th place all over the European countries. So it's a huge recovery. And now let's talk a bit about one problem that have already been mentioned by Anatoly and Dmitry, and we're going to talk about the labor market and the problem that we face in labor markets. So the share of people who reported that they have been fired during the last 2 weeks in Belarus is at minimum level, is at level of 1% only. And the share of respondents who tell about that they know some people who was fired during the last 2 weeks is also at the minimum level at 10%. Together with that, the rates of being fired is really at minimum level. 55% of all respondents report that they can see a staff shortages in the area where they work. So we can surely know this is labor deficit that everybody is talking about. But probably there is some solution to this problem of labor deficit that has been discussed all over the last year. And one of the solutions is to see whether people work according to their specialty, according to their educations that have obtained or not. So in Belarus, 46% of all respondents in November 2024 told that they have non-specialty job. So they work not according to their specialty. In Europe, this average number is 28%. So the difference is huge. And probably we can see this as an internal resource for Belarusians to maybe change their work. 52% of all respondents have specialty job, and majority of them are people with a high degree, so with bachelor's degree and something. And also, it's also characteristics for medical professionals, managers, and public sector employees. And mostly unskilled workers work outside of their specialty. And together with that, even that 46% of all respondents have no specialty job, about half of all respondents say that they want to change their job. So probably we can really see this as an internal factor which can lead us to more effective labor market in Belarus. And now let's talk about other problems that respondents pointed as really obstacles to Belarusian economy. We ask just a simple question: what obstacles are really hindering Belarusian economic growth from growing with every quarter more and more? And as we can see, the number one factor is usually sanctions impact. So 44% of all respondents say that sanctions impact is important for Belarus, is an obstacle for Belarusian economy. Then there is brain drain, which I'm talking about, which I've told about the labor deficit, the immigration from Belarus. So brain drain pointed like 40% of all respondents. Then it's regional conflict, war, inflation as a usual obstacle, and reduced trade with the West, which somehow related to sanctions impact. And as we can see, the majority of the top reasons are really external. So sanctions impact, the war, reduced trade, people see it really as a problem for Belarusian growth, for Belarusian economy growth. Only 15% of all respondents say that they see dependence on Russia as an obstacle for economy, and it's absolutely logical because Russia is trade partner number one right now. And 16% of all respondents say that it's difficult to answer this question because they're not really aware of what's happening. But for now, let's switch to the last forecast part. As we have already heard from Anatoly, his forecast about the wages, about the price regulations and monetary policy. Let us talk about how to respond and assess this forecast, if they really view this forecast realistic. And we ask just a simple question: do you follow the economic forecast of the government of Belarus? And the third of all respondents told that yes, they're aware, and the majority of them are aware of short and long-term forecast, both. Then we have run an experiment. We divided our sample in 8 parts and gave every part just one scenario, and we have asked them to identify, is it realistic or not really? We didn't tell them the information about the real Belarusian government forecasts and the real Belarusian government targets, but I will tell you. So the real disposable income, according to Belarusian government for 2025, should be at the growth by 4%, and consumer prices, or like inflation, should be no more than 5%. But we didn't tell that respondents, we just asked. And here are the results. If they imagine that Belarusian government plans to have 1% growth of population income for 2025, then 47% of all respondents believe this target. They think that this target is really realistic. And the question is, do people really see the differences between really different targets? Do they see which one is more realistic and less? And the short answer is not really. Because as we can see, there is a huge variety of different plans, of different targets. And the differences in answers are not really big. But still, we can say that respondents think that the target at 4% growth is realistic, because 56% of it told that it can happen. And our main target, which is Belarusian government target, 9% growth, only half of the respondents think that this is realistic. What more, the majority also of respondents say that probably it will not change a lot, like population income. It can be decrease of 1%, it can be growth of 1%. And we can see it also from the chart to the right that the quarter of all respondents say that they think that wage will remain the same in the next year. And the majority of others respondents say that probably the population income will be from 2% to 10% on average. And now let's turn to price control, to consumer prices, to inflation, which is more obvious here, because the majority of respondents think that the real target starts from 5% growth and ends at 20% growth. So the majority think that yes, okay, probably inflation is going to be at the level of 10% growth. But still, 56% of respondents who've been answering this question told that they can name the growth of 20% really realistic for Belarusian economy. But let's see on the different question how the prices will change. And still the majority thinks that, not the majority, but the third of it thinks that the prices will not change a lot. Also, the third of it think that it will increase by 5-10%, and some part think that it will increase even more. For now, let me have a quick summary for you to come up with some questions and then to ask them in the very end of our today's meeting. So we've been talking about the share of income, the income, the increase in wages. So the share of respondents with declining income is at minimum level, and consumption still exceeds savings rate as it was during the whole year. Then the share of wide respondents is also at minimal level, and it's accompanied by labor deficit, which respondents pointed at. Index is at neutral level, consumer confidence index, and respondents consider government targets to be realistic. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Violetta, for this positive. Now let's compare it with positive of other parts of economic agents, namely business, and Rodion Morozov would tell us about them.
Okay, good evening. Indeed, probably I will compete with Violetta in terms of positivity and optimism. Let's say. Even the topic of the presentation may sound a bit tricky, because we are trying to look at the situation in the enterprise sector through the lens of population surveys. So unfortunately, our traditional quarterly monitoring of Belarusian business is on hold due to socio-political situation in Belarus, and we are trying to dig out some insights from population survey. And this is another survey, not that used by Violetta in her presentation, and it's larger, I would say. And most figures in my presentation will be based on this research project that is larger, that you will see today, and the rest of the insights and results will be presented in February. And right now, in the context of absence of other relevant data for understanding business situation in the country, we will use this approach. You see that our sample was 2,000 individuals stratified by age, gender, region, and it was conducted in July-August 2024, and I will compare this data with previous waves that were conducted in July, August, or just July 2021 and 2019. So first, what we have in terms of figures of entrepreneurship in Belarus. So in our sample of 2,000 individuals, we got 427 responses from entrepreneurs. In this survey, entrepreneurs were defined based on the question whether responded alone or with others, were currently the owner of a business and were involved in managing this business, or were self-employed or selling any goods or services to others. It means that this survey considers all the freelancers, self-employed as entrepreneurs. And at the same time, based on the methodology of Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, we distinguish between early stage entrepreneurs who established business less than 3.5 years ago, and mature entrepreneurs whose business exists more than 3.5 years. So it means that to be considered as early stage entrepreneur or early stage firm, the business had to be established not later than in January 2021. So what we see, this is the distribution of early entrepreneurs by top 5 sectors. Again, I would like to remind you again that this is not the real distribution of Belarusian businesses across sector, but this is the distribution of individual respondents entrepreneurs in our sample based on the population survey. So it doesn't correspond to the Belstat statistic, for example. So as you may see, the share of entrepreneurs involved in retail is steadily growing from 2019. And the same situation mostly is observed in manufacturing. That is a good sign for any economy, that entrepreneurship in manufacturing sectors is increasing. And at the same time, these two lines related to wholesale trade and utilization, transfer, and storage is decreasing in terms of share of entrepreneurs involved in these sectors. Again, it's quite difficult to find out and to tell about all the factors behind these changes, but we just can hypothesize that this is the effect of sanctions and some disruption of transportation and some disruptions of previous business links with other countries. And at the same time, we see that top 5 sectors right here account for about 80% of total entrepreneurs in our sample. So what's next? First, we should look at current number of jobs, or another term, the size of entrepreneurs in our country. Again, we compare it 2019, 2021, and the general conclusion can be that Belarusian businesses, I mean all the businesses, and so are becoming larger in terms of the staff involved. So, for example, if in 2019 we saw that about 25% of entrepreneurs employed more than 6 individuals, now this percentage is about 35%. At the same time, again, I need to stress that this red part relates to self-employed and freelancers. This is not like legal entities. And at the same time, in terms of Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, they are considered as entrepreneurs and as business. So it means that they responded to questions that are asked from businesses and entrepreneurs. So as for income level, that money may not be the main motivation for entrepreneurs to be involved in entrepreneurial activity. And in this sense, we hypothesize that the sense of freedom or independence from the state, like so-called internal immigration, associated with entrepreneurship, politically motivated dismissals, new opportunities in online business can be driving forces for Belarusians to launch their own businesses. So again, they still earn more than the rest of the population, but in general, if we compare it to 2019, the share of those in the upper tertile is considerably lower. So what's next? The next is the distribution among so-called technology level. So based on the IC classification, all the industries can be divided into 3 levels based on the level of technology: low, medium, and high tech sectors. So, and for every economy, it's important, it's, I would say, an important target for policymakers to involve as many entrepreneurs in the medium and high tech sector. So here we see that this percentage is not that high as one might expect. And as for early stage entrepreneurs, about less even than 7% of them are involved in medium and high-tech sectors. It means that more than 95% of entrepreneurs work in low-tech sectors. So again, as for this classification, I would stress that these 6.6 are related mostly to advanced manufacturing and ICT services. And in this sense, we see that the level of early stage entrepreneurs is the same as it was in 2019. And as for established entrepreneurs or mature entrepreneurs, this level is even higher, notwithstanding a decline from 2021. As for export, everyone considers Belarus and knows that Belarus is an open economy, the export-oriented economy, and as for the business sector, it is still true. So if we see that, if we look at these graphs, we see that the share of entrepreneurs who do not sell goods or services abroad is mostly constant in 2019, 21, and 24.
At the same time, we know that they face different challenges in working with in Western markets, in export-import operations, in arranging payments, etc., etc. But at the same time, this is here you can see the graph from our SME surveys we conducted in March 2023 and August 2022, and you see that while answering the question about promising markets for companies like yours, most entrepreneurs at that time indicated domestic market. Again, we remember about excessive demand inside Belarus. We can notice the growth with respect to Russian market and some other countries from Eurasian Economic Union. And the main conclusion is that it's rather easier to start a business in 2024 than it was in 2019. We compare pre-war and pre-election year and the current year. And in general, you see that this green area is becoming larger, while at the same time the year 2021 was like a bottom line in terms of easiness of starting a business in Belarus. And we can attribute this not to like a, let's say, legal condition for starting a business, for opening a bank account or paying taxes, but rather with optimism and opportunities related to growing economy, increasing salaries and demand. It means that we may assume that answering this question, Belarusian entrepreneurs meant that there are a lot of niches in Belarus, the demand is growing, and that's going to be easier than in 2019 to sell their products or services. But again, we may remember that the economic growth in 2019 was about 1%, and now we have already seen that Belarusian economy has been growing for about 4% in 2024. So a pretty similar question was asked, and entrepreneurs needed to compare the easiness of starting business in 2022 compared to, in this case, 2023, and in case of previous year, 2021, with the year 2020. And again, here we see that comparing to the previous year, 2023, it's becoming more difficult. And to some extent, this is another signal that there are no much factor that can drive economy in the future and internal demand for products and services. And it looks like entrepreneurs feel that and reflected it in answering this question. So it means that it's becoming more difficult to start a business, to find niches, to find customers inside and outside the country. But at the same time, as for year 2020, unfortunately, we don't have data for 2019, so the situation was the opposite. There were bad conditions for starting a business in 2021, and the main factors for that year were political unrest and COVID in the country. So, and again, we remember that it was in July, and probably this was like a milestone, a certain milestone, and in the Belarusian history, I would say, do you remember the case of the Ryanair, the attacks on the independent media, etc., etc. That happened in summer 2021. So if we look at general perception of entrepreneurship as a career path in Belarus, entrepreneurship still remains a desirable career path. So entrepreneurs, both early stage and mature stage, believe that most people want to be entrepreneurs, and it is highly appreciated and evaluated option to build a career and to develop as a professional and earn money and provide their families with everything they need. So, and the situation is rather stable. So I suggest to compare the sum of these two blocks that are somewhat agree or strongly agree. And general situation looks quite positive in this sense. And if you look at mature businesses, we see that polarization of opinion substantially decreased from 2019. And in the same vein, the question was quite similar, and results correlate to a significant extent to the results, to the answers to the previous question. Entrepreneurs were asked whether successful, let's say, startups or successful businessmen have a higher level of status and respect. And again, we see that the majority of population rather agree to this, not the population, but the population of entrepreneurs rather agree with this statement. And we see that as for early stage entrepreneurs, the dynamics is mostly positive, while among mature entrepreneurs, this is a certain level maintained from 2019. So the situation in the perception of the status and attitudes towards entrepreneurship is not volatile over time in general. So it means that the propaganda and doesn't work against entrepreneurs, and neither from the positive side, neither from the negative side. So, and coming further to media coverage, and entrepreneurs were asked whether the public media and internet sources write and tell much about successful new businesses. And again, the perception of media coverage has become less polarized. It means that entrepreneurs has become more, or they believe more in, let's say, official aggressive propaganda, and they believe less in media in exile in terms of shaping their attitudes towards successful businesses in Belarus. So Belarusian entrepreneurs, if you talk about early stage, would rather say that mostly they can find positive examples of positive cases in media about doing business in Belarus. And as for mature entrepreneurs, I'm going to say it's like 50-50. But the opposite situation was observed in 2021. Again, when there was like in the situation of political unrest and aggressive propaganda and activities of independent media that still existed in Belarus at that time. So you see that polarization was higher, and substantially larger part of entrepreneurs reported that they disagree with the positive media coverage of doing business in Belarus. So, and as for business expectation, it is not like a business confidence index like that we reported last year, but to some extent it can provide some insight of what's happening or what Belarusian entrepreneurs expect to happen within next 5 years. So the first conclusion from me is that market dynamism and new opportunities caused by economic growth and increasing demand, both internal and external, and gendered positive expectation concerning job creation. So Belarusian businesses still believe that they will create jobs, and the situation is substantially better than it was in 2019. So this is particularly true for mature entrepreneurs. You see that if 2019 only 17.1% reported that they expected to create 20 plus jobs within next 5 years, this percentage has doubled by 2024. That means that in comparison to 5 years ago, Belarusian entrepreneurs believe that the economy and the demand will grow faster. As for early stage entrepreneurs, the situation is rather stable. You see that the number of those who reported active job creation is almost constant and is around 22% in all the 3 points of our observation. There is another important indicators demonstrating that organic growth of businesses in worldwide, and particularly in Belarus. This is this small graph that depicts expected job growth more than 10% and 50%. It means that here we see the number of businesses that expect that they will that their business or their employees will the number of their staff will increase twice within the next 5 years, and this increase will be more than 10%. Again, this is quite a surprising picture, demonstrating that mature businesses is more optimistic in terms of future growth, and it means that in terms of economic prospects in the country and outside, I mean, they expect the growing demand that will entail the growth and the increase in their in the jobs they create within enterprise. It's too quick. Can you come back for a while? So it was somewhat been wrong. Okay, here it is. So, and if we compare business expectation to the previous year, I mean 2023, we see that the share of entrepreneurs who expect the growth, who felt that their business will grow, is almost the same as it was a year ago. Here we compare to 2023, and in general situation looks more or less stable. It means that the economic condition in Belarus and perception of this economic condition reach a certain level, and which it has stabilized for a while. We'll see what will happen. Again, if you compare with the situation in 2021, the situation is substantially substantially better in terms of business expectation. And if we talk about next 6 months, so just to remind you that we're talking about survey conducted in July, so these 6 months are coming to the end this December. So, and the situation is as follows. Belarusian businessmen didn't expect that situation will change. And to some extent, it's again confirmed the idea of a certain stabilization, or let's say stagnation, of the economic situation through the eyes of Belarusian businesses. And if we compare to the year 2021, we can again notice that it was like a bottom line in terms of business perception, while the perception of opportunities are quite comparable to those observed in 2019. So, and as for general and positive conclusions, again, this data confirm the resilience, the capability to adapt of Belarusian business to external shocks, internal shocks, and new legislative initiatives like such as price regulation, for example. So, and whatever happens, Belarusian entrepreneurs find ways to not only to maintain a business, but rather to develop. And we see that general perception of economic conditions in Belarus has substantially increased and has become better than it was before the war in Ukraine. And to some extent, another not such an evidential conclusion is that the political crisis in Belarus appeared as a more important factor for Belarusian businesses than the war in Ukraine. So if internal situation in Belarus didn't create new opportunities in Belarus, the war did it in general. The next, the positive perception of businessmen and entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in general still exists in Belarus, and aggressive propaganda from both sides doesn't work against Belarusian entrepreneurs at all. So we observed less polarized opinions on that point. So, and Belarusian businesses have a positive outlook for future. It is no, they expect that at least the situation will stay at the same level. And we remember that this level, the current level, is pretty high in comparison to previous periods, and these circumstances drive the optimism and expectation of Belarusian businesses, particularly in terms of the job growth. So, and what else should I mention? So I would invite you to read another work by BEROC related to entrepreneurship based on the same survey. It's called Dreaming of Entrepreneurship or Requiem for a Dream. What kind of future do parents envision for their children in Belarus? It's available, a short version is available in English, a longer version is available in Russian. This work also stresses that entrepreneurship is the most, for Belarusian parents, entrepreneurship is the best career perspective and best career path for their children in current Belarus. So, despite all the challenges, despite all the external conditions, it still exists. And we expressed gratitude to Pixera Global and USAID that supported particularly this survey as a part of the larger project. And probably this is the end of my quite positive presentation, and going back to negative issues. Or
Yeah. Thank you, Dion. Yes. So the only question left is who would fill all these jobs potentially created by entrepreneurs? But that's a separate question. So let's now go to the question and answer section using my powers. So I'll start. Yeah. So here's microphone. Okay. Okay, so I'll actually start with a very naive question. Dmitry showed us that, yes, that this 2024 can be split into two halves, rapid growth in the first half, and then it looks like we have hit some concrete ceiling from the May, and there was no growth after that. But in Anatoly's projection, we are still expecting like 1.7% growth in 2025. So my question is, why are we waiting? Why we were not growing since May? Why we are waiting for a new calendar year to continue growth? Or under what assumption, like what are these assumptions that generate this result that we are not growing now for last half of the year, but will resemble growth in 2025? That's, I don't know, probably question to Anatoly and both to Dmitry.
Yeah, I should comment from my side. So you can think about this as a statistical effect. The first part of year 2024, it was much lower than we have currently. So even if we preserve the current level on annual basis, there still will be a growth in 2025 in comparison to 2024 because of the first half of the year when the initial basis was pretty low. So this, I think, is the main answer. And the second part, those negative impulses that we have observed in the second part of the year, they are not guaranteed that they will take place in 2025. For instance, I mentioned that currently there are signs of decreasing demand, not decreasing, slowdown in growth of demand from Russia, but still for 2025, as Anatoly presented, there are reasons to think that at least some growth will take place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will cap it a bit. So first about shocks. In the first half of the year, we have a positive agricultural shock, in the second half negative, so low harvest. So this is, I believe, temporal factor. And also the same with oil refining. So growth in the first half and then disruption through weather condition, and the output of oil products is still low now. So probably they will repair their equipment and it can grow next year or recover to the level which we see before. And second point, investments. So we see investment growth this year, and we will probably see some growth in investment next year. But this growth is not high, and but the business invests, and this will lead to some output benefits with some lag, yes. So, but because of this growth is not high, the potential growth of the Belarusian economy is also not very high.
Sure, very short addition from my side regarding the investment is a very, very important point. And I think the variation in the focus for the next year may be very sensitive to investment. So this, how I interpret the plan of the authorities, is just to push investments growth in 2025. So to the extent they will be successful, it will affect the actual growth rate. So if this plan will not be realized, is not realized, then the growth will be lower. If this plan will be somehow successful, so the growth rate may be higher. So I think this is one of the most important factors. So actually, the plan of authorities for 2025 is pretty similar, as I remember, to 2012, something like that, when they were talking about modernization. So actually, if we try to interpret figures today, the plan is pretty similar.
Yeah, and the official plan of authorities for 2025, if I remember correctly, is something like 5%, 4.1% growth. Okay. Do we have questions from the audience? Or I have questions from online audience. What? Oh.
Мне вот интересно мнение каждого. Значит, вот этот спрос, да, или потребление превышает сбережения. В чем феномен этого? То есть почему сейчас по-дикому белорусы начали потреблять, да? Не является это таким трендом, что здесь, наверное, начали массово покупать китайские автомобили, да? Вот не эта ли цифра влияет на то, что это массовое потребление? Если мы смотрим, то люди начали массово покупать новые автомобили, пересаживаться. И даже вот когда мои вот гости иностранные приезжают в Литву, потом в Минск, они удивляются этим количеству новых автомобилей на улицах, да? Наверное, одна из статей этого потребления, которое превышает сбережения. То есть люди перестали сберегать, и все пытаются идти на новую машину. Или как это понять вообще? Вот.
So the question is about consumption. Why, like, at the backdrop of growth in salaries, people do not save more but consume more. I can actually try to answer, and then maybe Violetta will add something. The main, I think, factor here is optimism. So it's actually your expectations about future are more important for consumption than your reality and whatever happened to you in the past. Even if your salary right now is not large, but you are sure that next year you would become billionaire, you now may take a loan and buy a luxury car or apartment or something. And even if you are currently millionaire, but you expect to lose job next year and expect everything to be bad, then you would probably like save more, consume less. So this spike in consumption is this manifestation of optimism that we see in household surveys.
Yes, I will add that there are several factors basically. First of all, you have the opportunity to spend money, you have an opportunity to consume. You have not this opportunity like 5 years ago as you have it right now. Loose monetary policies, like with the ability to have loans, to take credits, and it's really great opportunities for you to have credits and to then have big purchases. Also, the third one is that you told that there is like no increase in savings, but it's something that we have expected. It's not something that it was high and now it's low. No, we just accepted that. We assume that it's going to be high, but it's not, because it's easier to consume, to spend money than to save it. And it's like Belarusian fear of inflation kind of also played an important role, not to save money somewhere, but rather spend it.
Yes, I would agree on especially on the last point or that Violetta mentioned, that yes, looking at real estate market in Belarus, like it's also all-time high. People buy everything, doesn't matter who built it, what's the quality. And there are several reasons for that, but yeah, one of the reasons is this. It looks like Belarusians have these expectations of future high inflation, and they're trying to play in traditional Belarusian game, take mortgage and wait for hyperinflation.
Yeah, I add a bit about savings. Belarusian save now. And so, for example, the share of household income which goes to ruble term deposits now is at peak, multi-year peak. So, but because of so high income growth, wages growth, Belarusians has opportunities both to save much and to consume even more.
Short addition from my side, I agree. I will follow up what Anatoly have said. So if we look at the savings rates and macroeconomic, based on macroeconomic accounts, it is not that low. So if we compare with historical peaks, it is low, but it is not that low. This is first of all. But I think the main and most important factor why Belarusians are saving not that high as it was, there are no good instruments, tools for savings today. So for more than 2 decades, there was like a synonym. How to save it, the instrument was time deposits in foreign currency. Today, saving for time deposits in foreign currency, it's so huge risk, and taking in mind those interest rates that we have on hard currency today. So recently, some banks increased the rates, but as I remember, the highest rate today is 2.5 that available, and usual deposit the money for more than 2 years for this rate. So doing so, I think it's absolutely ridiculous for majority of people, and that is why, given these pretty low rates in foreign currency and the lack of credibility of this form of savings, it is much more attractive to consume, especially taking in mind pretty low interest rate in the whole. So I think this is a dominating factor.
Thank you so much, Philip Bekano, sociologist. The answer to this question might have been given by Dmitry or Anatol, whose speeches I unfortunately did not attend. If so, I'm very sorry. My question is about the optimism, the perceived optimism, and the reality of the economic situation. So basically, as Violetta and Radivon clearly demonstrated, the Belarusian society is very much optimistic about the economic situation in Belarus. Both entrepreneurs and general population, they feel like the situation is actually all right, especially comparing to like 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And this corroborates with different research which uses non-economy related indexes, like this social optimism is on the rise. However, my question is there anything to back this optimism? I mean, some objective parameters maybe, or statistics that is the economy really in that good shape? That's the question. Or is this optimism not really grounded on the economic reality and connected to it? Is it delusion?
Well,
Okay, I wanted to say that the question about optimism obviously does not go to me, but okay.
you look like the most optimistic person.
Yes, my presentation, I give my interpretation. I'm not sure that this is only working construction. So my interpretation of why consumer optimism is so huge, that having faced with a very huge and rapid growth of salaries, it's actually works as a kind of self-prophecy. So today you have a huge rapid growth, and even if trying being more rational, what is I think today the deepest factor behind this growth, rapid growth of wages, this is lack of the shortage of labor, and still this factor is on the agenda. That is why, and what we saw at Violetta's slides, people still expect, majority of people still expect the growth of wages, and this again, like a virtuous circles, plays for fueling consumer sentiment. Is it well-grounded or not? It depends on the criteria you base for judging this effect, but this is kind of my interpretation.
I would say also that there are like two major factors. One is that optimism is always relevant to the prior expectations and to what like people observe around themselves. And since 2020, since the beginning of war in Ukraine, so people like I guess expected much worse situation. So now they look at Ukraine and they see that nobody bombs Belarus. They look at Russia and see that nobody tries to put Belarusian men to fight. And they look at the economy, and it's not just not worse, but it's actually better. Salaries are much higher, so yeah, there is. I guess this is the main driver of optimism, that everything is way better than it was expected. Now, how sustainable it is, I would guess that not very sustainable. There is no reasons to expect that like Belarusian economy now is different from what it was from 2011 to 2020. And as Anatoly model shows that we're going to converge back. But Anatoly?
Two points. First, about statistics. Yes, so these optimistic expectations are consistent with statistical data. For example, in November, the consumption of goods by Belarusians was more than 22% higher in real terms than the average value of 2021. So the growth is very significant. And second, about this optimism. This, I would say, overly optimism is a sign, another sign of economic overheating. And this situation is quite dangerous because economy becomes very vulnerable to strong shocks.
Just 2 moments, really short ones, about economic growth and expectations of economic growth. When we ask people, how do you assess economic situation, like through which indicators, they say that the majority says that it is because of their financial situation, their personal incomes. So if personal incomes are rising, then economic situation is improving. The logic is perfect. And like from their personal experience, everything is good. That is why the expectations are also better than it was. And what about economic expectations as a whole? It's not like 100% of all respondents say that economic situation is going to improve in the next year. It's only 17 or 19%, as I remember, in November 2024. So it's not like the majority. The majority said that it's going to stay at the same level as it was. So just a quick summary.
Just some ideas to add to that Violeta said. In general, if you imagine a small-scale entrepreneur or small-scale firm, there are, let's say, a couple of indicators, economic indicators that they keep eye on. So let's take inflation. So it's an acceptable level that Belarusian entrepreneurs are quite used to. So they observe the growth in salaries, so that that result in a higher demand. So it works. It's pretty good. So, and what else? Credit resources are quite available to business. It's quite easy to get a credit in the bank. So the monetary policy is quite supportive for doing business and for developing business. And that's quite enough to take a decision and to build their perception about what's going on around.
Okay. Let me. Okay. Dmitry.
Thank you. Dmitry Denilchuk, economist and entrepreneur. And this one goes to Violeta. Basically, I really like the forecast, self-forecasting of the economic perspectives of Belarus. And when I scroll back my memory to pre-war times, and when all of the major financial institutions forecasted that the long-term growth in Belarus will be limited to 1.5%. It really interests me. What do you think your responders could answer about longer-term perspectives, right, in numbers? And maybe they need to be given a benchmark because the level of the financial education in Belarus is quite poor, right? So when Belarusians are saying numbers about the economic growth, I wouldn't think that they quite understand what's behind them and what could those numbers mean. So the question is, do you think it's possible to kind of look into the long-term growth expectations of Belarusians, and maybe it's even necessary to give them a benchmark, for example, of the long-term growth in the European Union, to see whether they think there's going to be a divergence or convergence.
Thank you. I want to clarify just what indicators are interested in. Expectations about GDP, expectations about price, GDP growth. Okay. This is a question when respondents do not really sure what to answer. It's a question when their response is difficult to answer is the highest, because it's really difficult for them not to predict the future of the GDP of economy, but also the today's status of the GDP. So we can ask them about their financial situation in the family. We can ask about economic situation in the next year, but to make predictions for the 3 or 5 years, it's too much. It's too much to ask for respondents. I better ask Anatoly than respondents, for sure.
And I guess the question that Violeta showed, it was not about that we were trying to make population predict growth. It was about how much do they trust official prognosis.
How realistic, how they feel, is it realistic or not really?
Okay, so I have a couple questions from Zoom. They're partially already answered. Like one is what's the prognosis of real salaries? I guess the answer was something like 5%. Inflation was something like 7%. Would foreign exchange reserve change? I guess it's not that relevant. Probably not. We're not using them. Then, will increase in minimum wages to 100 rubles have any effects on inflation? I don't think anybody is earning minimum wage in Belarus. Do you think it will have effect on inflation?
No, I just want to say that our, let's say, baseline scenario is consistent with the government assumption about state budget. So this measure is taken into account.
Okay. And so the second actually interesting question, I would say, it's about, well, it's maybe interesting and hard. Can we define what is middle class in Belarus and what's going on with middle class in Belarus, if we can define it? Is it stable? Is it disappearing, growing, or something? I would try to just some small guess from Violeta's presentation is that, so what we've seen in Violeta's presentation, on average, people are getting richer. Well, we know it from macro statistics, salaries are growing. But what is worrying is that although smaller percentage of population report decrease in income, higher percentage of those who report, they say that they need to save on food. Saving on food is economically, it's equivalent of very bad. So that's the last thing that people should do. And so it looks like on average salaries are rising, but those for whom they're not rising, they are feeling like there is some fraction of population who feel very bad. No? That's my interpretation, but...
Okay, short answer that the first part of the question was, can we define middle class? The short answer is yes, we can. And actually it depends on which criterions we will use. And there are absolutely different criterions that are possible to be used besides the criterions on the income. But I think this is the most important and crucial criteria. And if we use it, yes, we can say that during the last couple of years, there are some positive or attractive trends in Belarus. So, for instance, the gap between median wage wage and real and average wage is closing, so it is still pretty huge, but it is normal situation. But the level of inequality, it is lower than it was a couple years ago. Is it good or bad news? I'm not ready to judge. There are both sides of the coin here with, but the allocation has become somehow better in terms of equality. But how you will treat it, again, it depends on broader criterions rather than just income. What is more important, I think, if we judge not only in purely economical terms, how, for instance, how this medium class looks like in comparison to other countries. And here I also presented a chart regarding this. The news are not that good. So summing up, purely in economic criterions, yes, we always can find a so-called medium class, and during the last couple of years, it became even somehow more concentrated than it was. But the further job depends on you, which criterions apply to which perspective you want to use.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the last question, and then we're finishing. Okay, the last two questions, let's collect them.
Thank you. Ivan Sukhim, political advisor and a media expert. It was a general expectation after 2020 that the emigration of hundreds of thousands of Belarusians, especially highly qualified, will undermine the economy and undermine especially the entrepreneurship. Judging by what we heard from Radion, from the survey, the reality is probably the opposite. Is it a paradox, or maybe there is some difficulties and some mistakes in judging the real situation, because it helped to push up the entrepreneurship, the spirit of entrepreneurs, the how it is desirable to become an entrepreneur. How do you explain this paradox?
Let's collect another question.
Okay, my name is Artyom. So, okay, you've mentioned, it's probably this question to Anatoly. You've mentioned about overheating. And Belarusian economics is overheating for a long period of time. And also there was chart with predictions of growth of GDP. And to 2027, it will be approximately 0.7. And can we say that in 2027, we will face bad consequences of this overheating, and what consequences it will be?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm starting answering the question. Thank you very much for this very insightful question. It's already insightful. So, talking about entrepreneurship in Belarus. So, we can 3 points, as I mentioned, that we compare with each other. So, first, I would say that currently, in the current situation, entrepreneurship or any kind of entrepreneurial activity in Belarus is considered as an alternative to immigration. So, nevertheless, there is a shortage of labor force in the market. Many people want to be entrepreneurs to keep themselves separated from the state. So we know that the state is trying to influence large private businesses. So again, politically motivated dismissals can happen elsewhere. And in this sense, being a self-employed or freelancer or start a small firm is attractive in terms of, again, alternative to immigration. And to some extent, we can equal it to like internal immigration. when you do not communicate with the state, let's say tax inspection, and when your business or your entrepreneurial activities is pretty small or invisible and it's not interesting to law enforcement agency, it's quite acceptable, it's attractive, and it's promising for Belarusians. And in this sense, it's not like a paradox, and as we may hypothesize, it's rather like a not opportunity-driven entrepreneurship when entrepreneurs see a lot of opportunity and the economy is growing and demand is growing, but rather like necessity-driven entrepreneurship manifested in the desire to feel free from different enterprises, public agency, etc., etc. And in general, this is a positive signal, not for the current economic stance, but for Belarusian future. Belarusian future, I'm absolutely convinced that the future is Belarus will be based on entrepreneurial spirit of its population and the perception of entrepreneurs and businessmen in the Belarusian society.
Yeah, and also like one of the easy ways to keep morale high, as we do in BEROC, if you kick out all the depressive people, then you're left only with optimists. Violetta, you want to add something?
Yes, about overheating. So overheating is a situation where producers cannot meet the high demand by using the factors of production at their optimal level. So this is basically the disbalance between demand and supply in the economy, and the consequence of this situation is increased pressure on prices. Until now, inflation in Belarus has been contained by strict price controls on the domestic market. But, for example, we see that unregulated prices for unregulated services has been growing at rates about 8-10%, much higher than prices growth for foods or non-food items. So this means that inflationary overhang is accumulating in the economy, and the scale of this inflationary overhang is quite substantial now. And the result, the consequence of this situation will be probably prolonged high inflation in Belarus. So the baseline scenario assumed that in 2026, even despite narrowing this excess demand, the slow growth in the economy, inflation will still be about 8% because this inflationary overhang will transform gradually to prices.
Okay, thank you. And I think, yeah, we're running out of time, and there is the last short question from Zoom. It's a question for Anatoly also, that Minister of Trade was talking about maybe like making milder this administrative price control system, or maybe even getting rid of it. So one question is, if they would get rid of administrative price controls, what will be inflation? And second, is there optimal level of administrative price control that I don't know, that will be optimal for everybody, business and population?
Very interesting question. I have no answer to the second part. So, but for the first, if there were not price control at all in 2023, 2024, so now inflation could be around 10-11%, not 5.5 as it is. This rate, we could see this rate in 2023, 2024. So this means that inflationary overhang is higher than the difference between 5 and 10%. So probably closer to 10%. This means that we probably can see a price spike, and inflation will be 10 or a bit more next year. But I believe that completely removing price control is quite risky for government because of some social costs. So it's not baseline scenario for me.
Okay, thank you. And I have answer for the second question. There is the optimal price control system. It is an absence of price control system.
I would disagree. It depends on how you define optimality. So if you define it only purely from economic reasoning, yes, I could agree with you, but it's absolutely meaningful to include some additional criteria dependent
Because of
market.
religious reasoning? Okay,
No,
we'll
no,
discuss it on the coffee break. But yeah,
It depends on how you define it, optimality. I mean.
of course, yeah. I am talking about economic optimality.
Definitely
So
some-
thank you everybody who spent time with us and hope to see you on some future BEROC events. Thank you very much.